Lesson 2.6, adding and subtracting unlike fractions. Yesterday we covered like fractions. Remember, every time that you add and subtract, you need to have a common denominator. Yesterday all the denominators were the same, so today we're going to have denominators that are not the same. So our first example here, we have 5/8 plus a negative 3/4. And a lot of these problems today in your book, you'll be able to actually easily identify your common denominator. In this case, my least common denominator is going to be 8. So this fraction already has a denominator of 8. I need to get this denominator as 8. So I need to multiply the numerator and the denominator by 2. I would now have 5/8 plus negative 6/8. Now you could go ahead. Denominator stays the same. My numerator would be 5 plus negative 6 here. Do your operation and we get negative 1 over 8. So negative 1/8 is our answer. Example 2, 5/6 plus negative 2/3. Again, need to have a common denominator. That common denominator would be 6. In order to do that, I need to multiply the second fraction by 2 to the numerator and denominator. And I no longer have negative 2/3, I have negative 4/6. Denominator stays the same, 6. Here we have 5 plus a negative 4 would give us 1. So our answer here is 1/6. Example 3 might not be so easy here. It's probably pretty difficult for us to figure out what the common denominator of 96 and 128 would be. So a lot of people want to go ahead and multiply these two numbers together to get a denominator. Yes, it would give you a common denominator, however not the least common denominator. And what would happen in the end is you'd actually have to reduce a lot more. If you actually multiply 96 times 128, you'd wind up with a denominator of 12,288, which would be gross to work with. An easier way to figure out a common denominator or least common denominator is the L method, I call. So it's basically kind of like upside down division. So we have 96 and 128. Well, what can go into 96 and 128? Maybe something as simple as 2 you could start out with. When you take that time by 2, 2 can go into 98 48 times. 2 can go into 128 64 times. Now these two numbers 48, 64, 2 can go into both of them. However, maybe you see something a little bit larger, such as a number 8. 8 can go in there. Well, 8 can go into 46 6 times. 8 can go into 64 8 times. Now you have 6 and 8. Still something can go into 6 and 8. That being a 2. A 2 can go into 6 3 times, and a 2 can go into 8 4 times. Now, in order to figure out your least common denominator here, you're simply going to multiply all of them together. So you'd have 2 times 8 times 2 times 3 times 4, and you would wind up with 384. 384 as a denominator, much better than 12,288. So now what you need to do is determine how many times, or how are you going to go from 96 to 384. In order to do this, you would multiply the denominator by 4. What you do to the denominator, you do to the numerator. So we have negative 28 over 384 minus a negative. Well, when you minus a negative here, this is going to turn into a plus. Now we need to get 128 to 384. And in order to do that, you're going to multiply by 3. When you do the denominator, you must do to the numerator. And the way to figure that out is take 384 and divide 128 into it, and it'll tell you that it's 3. So now we have 15 times 3 is 45, and my denominator still is 384. Now we could go ahead and do our computation here. We know that the denominator still stays 384. Denominator still stays 384. Take care of your numerator here. We have negative 28 plus 45 would give us a positive 17. So our fraction here is 17 over 384. Next step here, we have mixed numbers. Anytime you have a mixed number, it's easiest just to go ahead and convert these mixed numbers into improper fractions. So this first fraction here, negative 4 1/8, when we convert it, it's still going to be negative. And when we convert that, remember we multiply and we add here, so we're going to get a negative 33/8 plus multiply, add, and we get 29/12. If you don't know what the common denominator for 8 and 12 would be, again, you could set up the L method and throw 8 and 12 in there. A lot of us can go ahead and look at this and identify that the least common denominator in this case would be 24. So in order to get to 24, we'd have to multiply 8 by 3, and we'd have to multiply 3 to our numerator as well. The next fraction, 29/12, in order to get there, we'd have to multiply both by 2. When we do this, we wind up with negative 99/24 plus 58/24. Our denominator is over 24. So now we need to go ahead and add our numerators. In this case, we have negative 99 plus 58. When you add that together, we get negative 41. So negative 41/24. And you can leave your answer as improper unless it states to change to a mixed number. So example 2, go ahead, pause the video here, give it a shot. Remember, we have mixed numbers. Change it to improper first, then find your common denominator. So pause it and give it a shot. Now that you're back, you've already converted. We get negative 31/6 plus 29/8. That should be our first step. Next, we would have found out that our common denominator is 24, so I need to multiply negative 31/6 by 4 to get the denominator 24, and I need to multiply 29/8 by 3 to get our denominator 24. Giving us two new fractions to work with. When we do our multiplication here, we wind up with negative 124 over 24, and we wind up with 87 over 24. Now we go ahead and do our computation here. We know it's out of 24, and we have negative 124 plus 87 giving us negative 37. So our answer is negative 37/24. Our last example, a word problem example. During January, Nikki watched television 2 1/4 hours for the first week, 2 1/8 hours for the second week, 1 3/4 hours the third week, and 1 1/2 hours the fourth week. How much time did she watch television during the 4-week period? So we're figuring out how much time she spent. In order to do this, we need to add all the hours together. So we have 2 1/8 plus 2 1/4 plus 1 3/4 plus 1 1/2. Here's the total amount of hours, and we're trying to figure out the total amount of hours. In order to do that, we need to do our conversions here. These are all mixed numbers, so convert them to improper first. Our first 2 1/8 here is going to convert to 17/8 plus 2 1/4 would be 9/4 plus 7/4 plus 3/2. So we've done all of our conversions. Next, we need to figure out our common denominator. In order, looking at these, most of us can determine that it is going to be 8. So we need to multiply this fraction by 2, that fraction by 2 to get that denominator 8. And the last fraction has a 2 as a denominator, so we need to multiply it by 4. When we do this, we now have 17/8 plus 18/8 plus 14/8 plus 12/8. And that is going to equal something over 8. So what we need to do now is add our numerators together, giving us 61/8. Now she watched 61/8 of TV in 4 weeks. What you might want to do there is actually convert it. 61/8 is going to convert to 7 5/8 hours. Much easier to envision. So basically, if you think about it, the 5/8 is close to 4/8. 4/8 is a half. So basically she watched just over 7.5 hours of TV in 4 weeks. This concludes our lesson on 2-6, adding and subtracting on like denominators.